Hi everyone, welcome back to the Mentality Mondays Healthy Masculinity Conversation Series, a part of the Mentality Project. I'm Chelsea Hill. I use she and they pronouns. I'm one of the health promotion specialists here at the Well, and today we're very excited to have Jennifer Hunt as our special guest. I also have our co-lead with me, Anthony Siliberto, who will introduce himself, and then we'll pass it off and get it started.
Hey y'all, my name's Anthony Siliberto. I use he, him pronouns. I am one of the assistant directors for fraternity and sorority programs, and as Chelsea mentioned, a co-lead on the Mentality Project. And to get us started, Jennifer, we just want to learn a little bit about you. So if you could tell us about yourself and the position you hold at Tulane.
Hey y'all, I'm Jennifer Hunt. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I work for the Well for Health Promotion. My title here is assistant director, but what that basically means is I work on sexual health and sexual violence prevention, programming and events for the Well. And I'm an advisor for SAPHE, which is a student organization, a departmental organization on campus that does 24/7 crisis intervention work around sexual violence.
So, thank you.
So I'm gonna ask, why do you do the work that you do, and what drove you to it? Like, how did you get to where you are now at Tulane? Just all of the interesting stuff that you can tell us about Jennifer Hunt and her journey.
When people ask me like how I got here, I'm always like, how much time do you have? Because I actually like talking about this, especially with people who are kind of starting to think about how they're going to move into their careers after school. Because I definitely was one of those people that thought I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I went into graduate school. And then very quickly I realized this is not at all what I want to do and had to kind of figure out something else. And I think my journey has been a testament to that's okay. Like you don't have to know right away what you want to do. You will find the right work for yourself. So to be less vague, my background and my training is in trauma response and advocacy work. So I went to graduate school to study trauma, and then after graduating, I went into an advocacy role. I've worked with survivors of torture, individuals going through immigration and asylum processes, individuals going through emergency food stamp, TANF, Medicaid processes, and then really have kind of, in the last couple of years, focused all of my energy on working with survivors of sexual violence and other power-based violences, particularly interpersonal violence. So that is kind of a really quick and dirty description of kind of all the places that I've been. But the reason I do this work is always a hard thing to answer, honestly, because I think there's people that are just kind of drawn to advocacy and prevention work, and it's hard to describe why or what led you to that place. But really, I believe in people's right to a dignified, healthy, safe life. I believe in their right to be respected and to be treated as a whole person. And I think advocacy and prevention work allow me to kind of relate to people in that way and to work in a professional field that encourages a healthy, more safer life in my community and with individuals that I care about. So I think that is in part like what kind of led me to advocacy. I just really enjoy the work too. Honestly, it's something that I really enjoy doing. And so I keep doing it.
Yeah, it sounds like you got to have passion to be doing this work for sure. It's not for the faint of heart. Like if there's no love, if there's no, like you said, real empathy behind it, you're not going to continue on with this work. So it's so awesome.
People will sniff you out real quick too. If you don't have burnout
as well will find you.
Yep.
Without a doubt.
That sparked a question for me on, I don't think that any of us doing this work, it was like a linear path on like, this is what we want to do. I think we all just like came into it from experiences, whether it be personal experiences or, kind of educational experiences. So when working with students and doing prevention work on campus, what advice do you give to those that say they want to do this work?
Yeah, okay, so that is a way easier question to answer because I mean, I truly believe if there's one thing you can do to help yourself out when looking for what you want to do in the future, it's try it. So get into that space, get into that field in some way. So I'm realizing not everybody can kind of go try out being a doctor, or not everybody can go try out being a 24/7 advocate, et cetera. But see what roles within that sphere you could kind of dip your toes into, so that you're experiencing the space, you're around the professionals that work in that environment, you're hearing and learning about the more detailed aspects of that work. So you might kind of generally know what a day in the life of this profession looks like, but you've never actually seen it. And so finding a way, either I encourage you to be paid for your labor. I know everybody kind of wants that. So I first encourage to look for paid positions in places. If you are in the situation where you might be able to take some unpaid time, you might consider like an internship that is not paid, or something like volunteer work. But find a way to actually enter into that space. It doesn't have to be for months and months and months, but can you spend a couple of afternoons in this space? Could you volunteer for a couple of events with an organization that does the kind of work that you want to do? And really just see, is this actually kind of what I want to spend my time doing? Do I like being in this space for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours a day? If the answer is yes, then that's a pretty good sign. And I think that that's a good way of kind of knowing, okay, I'm on the right track here. Will I love this forever? Maybe not, but do I love this right now? And would this be a good place for me? Yeah, I think so. And so I really say, get in where you fit in, try it for a while, see how it feels, and then kind of go off of your instincts, how you feel about something. And I'm a testament to that. So like I said, I went to graduate school really convinced I was going to be a professor. I really thought, I was going to teach for a living in higher education. And I hated it once I was in that environment. I love teaching, but I really did not like that a specific type of work. And my professor said, you know what, there's an internship I think that you would be perfect for at this center that serves survivors of torture. I think you should think about it. And I went and I did that work for a semester, and I was like, oh, this is it. And I never looked back. And so I think that you really can trust your gut if you give it the opportunity to make a judgment about a situation. So try to get in there. That's my advice.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think it's good for students to know, like, it's not a linear path always, and you just got the waters a little bit.
Yeah, and don't, I think that we're taught sometimes that having a strong identity is really kind of having a path and an idea. And if the job description is what you want to do, but the title's a little different than what you expected for yourself, that's okay. If the job that you started in isn't the job that you want to stay in, and in fact, your colleague has the job that you actually really want, and so you start moving into that position, that's okay. It's okay to kind of follow the path that feels right for you, and to not hold yourself to the expectations that you maybe set in high school or in college or at any stage in your life. It's okay to kind of give yourself permission to do what feels right for you.
This is great, tangible, relatable advice. I hope for those students that are watching, you can really take this away and use it. So thank you so much for touching on that. We wanted to dive into talking, more about masculinity now, and really just have you speak on how your work here at Tulane intersects with healthy masculinity and sexual violence prevention.
So it intersects in ways that are almost hard to describe, because you have to talk about them like they're two separate things, but they're absolutely intermingled. You can think of it as like a web. So there's a lot of things that go into sexual violence prevention, and we often call them kind of primary prevention skills, techniques, behaviors, and healthy masculinity kind of falls under that primary prevention umbrella. So what primary prevention is trying to do is to stop sexual violence before it happens. So stop the beliefs, the behaviors, the actions, the cultural environment that encourages sexual violence to occur. And so primary prevention comes in and says, what's happening here that is allowing for sexual violence to happen in this environment? what's missing? So is it anger management skills? Is it impulse control? Is it empathy? Is it unhealthy norms about different identities, different sexualities, specifically unhealthy norms around masculinity? Like, these are the ideas and skills and behaviors that they follow us into our relationships, into our workspaces, into our bedroom, and they actually kind of give us the range of possibility and options that we consider as even available to us. So if we're living in an environment where unhealthy and toxic masculinity is kind of the norm, then that's what we expect. Those are the options that are available to us. But when we actually start exploring masculinity in all of its healthy and positive kind of aspects, and all of the different ways that masculinity can be, a protective force. Let me restate that. I'm not talking about like men protect, masculine protect. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm talking about is an identity that is empowering to your health, to your community, to your sense of self. If masculinity is an identity that you hold, regardless of your gender identity, that inspires a sense of self and community in you and allows you to act in a way that is more empathetic and in line with community, then those are the skills that we need to kind of teach people and encourage in people. And so the reason healthy masculinity is part of sexual violence prevention is the same reason empathy building is, or community engagement is, or some of those social emotional learning skills that we have, like anger management or impulse control, because all of those different norms, like I'm repeating myself, but behaviors, skills, actions that we have access to give us our set of possibilities and our set of options when we're making decisions. And so when we encourage healthy masculinity, when we talk about it and when we actually explore what that looks like, we give an entirely different set of options to people. And so that's why healthy masculinity and a discussion about masculinity in general is important for sexual violence prevention. And that's kind of how I see them working together.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's not about fitting the status quo of what, we think of when we think about masculinity, and understanding there is room for growth and self-exploration in behaviors, right? And like reflecting on our previous behaviors and things like that.
Absolutely. And, when we kind of start thinking of masculinity as just what it is, which is a term that describes kind of a spectrum of different identity characteristics that aren't ascribed to a certain anatomy or identity, but really are just kind of like the term that we use to describe a spectrum of behavior. And then we have other terms that describe other spectrums of behavior. But when we start thinking of that, it's like, well, of course we need to talk about this, because we need to talk about any identity that somebody holds and how that identity can be empowering and not harmful to self or others. So, I don't think that masculinity is any different from any of the other kind of identities that we hold, that we use to move in the world. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And moving to our next question, do you think there is still an expectation from society for males or masculine identified folks to adhere to stereotypes or be confined to a box?
Yes. Yes, I do. I think that it's harmful in so many unbelievable ways. And one thing that we talk about how it's harmful to people that don't hold masculine identities and how it's harmful to like the community at large, but we don't always talk about how it's harmful to people who do hold masculine identities. Yeah. And how that kind of that fitting into the box of stereotypes, and that, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Enforcement of those stereotypes. So if you step out of this box, you're going to be in trouble for it. All of that is harmful to masked people, right? Like, that limits their options, that limits their ability to authentically display who they are and their range of masculinity, right? It affects their ability to have close interpersonal relationships because they've been taught that they can't or shouldn't. All of those things harm masculine folks. And so yes, I do think that stereotype exists. I think it's harmful in basically every place where we try to ask people to hold inauthentic identities and then we punish them if they're unwilling to. I think that's always going to be harmful. And I think, you know, it's interesting because I just lectured for a class, and in that class I said, okay, let's talk about social norms. So like, what are some social norms that we have around sex, right? And almost all of them were stereotypes or expectations of masculine identifying folks. So like, masked folks want sex all the time, or masked folks, you know, are the only ones that are supposed to instigate it, nobody else should. Or, you know, there were all these, and you just start and you think like, not only how harmful is that for the partners that they have, but how unbelievably sad and harmful that is for the people that are being like forced into those kinds of social norms that are not healthy or not helpful. And so we can like identify it generally, but we also can feel them inside of ourselves. Like, we can feel those stereotypes that we have about masculinity inside of ourselves and kind of regurgitate them easily. So I do think it's interesting that like it's available to us that these that this box exists and people are being forced into it. But it's so ingrained within us that if you ask us, like, what are some social norms that we know, we can regurgitate them instantly. So I think that that's like an added level that we need to consider is, yes, that box still exists. Yes, people are still being forced in it. We know that it exists, and yet it still lives within us. So like, what do we do about all of that? I think is something that keeps coming up in conversations that I'm having with students.
You talked on this a little bit, at least what the harm that happens that happens to the folks that hold masculine identities and still, you know, adhere to traditional masculinity. And so I was just wondering, with your background with trauma, if you could speak to how, you know, being in this man box or in this box, how it contributes to how masculine identified folks cope with traumatic experiences.
Yes, I can. So before I get on this, I do want to give a little bit of a trigger warning that I'm going to be describing some of the emotional and physical experiences that people who identify as male might experience after sexual violence. So just kind of, I'm not going to go into any details or anything like that, but I'm going to be talking about that. So absolutely. The way that I see it most severely and saliently affecting masculine identifying folks is that there's kind of a like multi-step process. We never talk to masculine folks about what it looks like to be victimized by violence. We don't talk to them like they can be victims of violence. We don't give them the language to describe themselves as victims or survivors of violence. So there's this first acculturation that we do to young people that says, this isn't going to happen to you, and I'm not even going to give you a language to talk about it if it does, because it's not going to happen to you, right? So there's that. There's a kind of, while it is true that when we look statistically, we do see that masked folks are perpetrating sexual violence at higher rates than femme identifying folks, but we also look at statistics and see that there is a huge amount of masked identifying folks that are sexually violated and are harmed, but we don't talk about them. We don't talk about sexual violence in that language. We completely leave it out from the narrative. So when we are willing to talk about sexual violence, it's from a femme identified point of view. And so what happens is, and there's a third level of masked folks realize that the narrative is that they are the perpetrators and not the survivors. So like, there's multiple things that happen. And then what you're asking a mask identifying person to do is to overcome that language and that stigma, to claim an identity that has never been offered to them, and just the sheer fear of, if I walk into, for instance, a rape crisis center, are people going to think I'm the perpetrator? So that those kinds of thoughts are that we give to mask identifying folks. We're like, here, this is how you deal with sexual violence, set them up completely to not be able to receive help. And so we have people who experience sexual violence and have literally no skills or resources to turn to in many ways. And so I think that that's a way that these toxic ideas about masculinity, about what happens to masc identifying folks and what doesn't, about, you know, who hurts people and who doesn't, who can be hurt and who can't, those norms that run throughout everything, right? Boys don't cry. I mean, that same narrative goes into you can't be harmed by somebody else, so you'll never need support. And I can't think of anything more harmful for a survivor. So that's kind of where I see those things lying together. And I want to like speak to any survivors that might hold masculine identities that are watching and just say a couple of things. You might have fear that you're the only one. You might have fear that people won't believe you because of your identity or because of the identity of the person who harmed you. You might be fearful that you can't enter into communities of survivors because maybe you would remind a survivor of the person who harmed them. These might be fears that you're having. And I want to say, like, the reason I can name them is because you're not the only one that has these fears. We've heard them before, and they are so real. They are real fears, but I want to alleviate some of them. Sexual violence happens to masc folks every day. I know hundreds of survivors that hold masculine identities. We believe you. We have resources for you. I'm not going to lie to you, like, you're not going to encounter some stigma sometimes or some microaggressions sometimes, but I will tell you that most survivors experience that, and there are advocates here that will tell you that you didn't deserve that, that the way people are talking to you is incorrect, that we absolutely believe you. So I want you to kind of trust yourself and trust some of the advocates around you to just reach out and ask for a little bit of help, because as soon as we know that you need help, we can start providing it. But I realize that it's really hard to say those first words. So I want you to know that you are not alone, that there are people who won't be surprised by what you tell them, and that will be here to help. So I appreciate that question, Chelsea, because I think like masculinities, the toxic ideas around toxic masculinity prevent people who need support from getting it. And that's a cycle that needs to stop. And honestly, that starts with advocates and preventionists coming correct and really meeting people where they are. So please reach out.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think everyone needs to hear that. And because like, you are not alone in this process. Even though we say it's a process, you get to navigate that, right? Like, you get the ownership of what that process looks like, which I think is key. Moving forward to kind of reporting and things like that, you started shortly after the Tulane Climate Survey was released, and I know that has shaped a lot of the work the three of us have done and how we work together. What prompted the Mentality Project to be what it is, and how have you seen the project evolve since starting last year?
Yeah. So the impetus behind Mentality Project was there was a real realization that there wasn't spaces that were specifically designed for men to engage. And Dr. Jordan West is a researcher who came to campus and did some research around students of color and sexual violence. And she says this thing that I think like will stay with me forever. She says, there's a difference between programs that welcome you and programs that were made for you. And I think that what is important about that is sexual violence programs before the Mentality Project might have been welcoming to masc folks, might have genuinely wanted masc folks to come and to participate, but was it made for them? Was it specifically made for people who hold masculine identities to come engage? Was it culturally specific enough? And I think the answer was no before this. And now the Mentality Project is an example of being responsive to your community and saying, we've made something for you, and we would like to engage you around these issues. We know that you want to engage, but we also know that maybe the systems that were in place before were not accessible to you. And so we have kind of we have learned from what you have said, and we have tried to create a space that was made for you to engage around these issues. So that's the impetus behind the Mentality Project, is realizing that men and mask folks and mask identifying folks had a very important and central role to play in this conversation and in this change, and making sure that there were mechanisms that were specifically there for them to kind of work through. That is not to say that all of our programming isn't for everyone, but we know that if a, and this is true with any identity, again, if a program doesn't speak to you in your life, it means nothing to you. You know, if I talk to you about things that have nothing to do with your life or have nothing to do with your daily lived experience, I've wasted your time. And so the idea was to try to get away from some of those more general programs and educational things that maybe didn't map onto your life or your lived experience, and try to provide an alternative. So that's kind of the background of the Mentality Project. Where I've seen it go is just kind of constantly trying to respond to what we're hearing from our students. So what kind of engagement do you want? What topics do you want to talk about? How do you want to do this? COVID has added an extra element. So Mentality Project is supposed to be a pretty intimate cohort, kind of in some places, and other places, bigger events and things like that. But the core of it was to build more of a community, and that's hard to do over Zoom. So how do we do that? How do we still engage students, still engage our community, but being safe? And so I think the places where Mentality Project has grown is to find different scaffolded approaches to talking about masculinity. So larger scale events, smaller workshops, lunch and learns, lectures, online movie or videos that you can watch, and then hopefully in the future some cohort style kind of organization, so that people can decide how they want to interact with this and find the thing that works best for them. So I've seen a great amount of flexibility, of responsiveness, and just kind of diversifying the different ways that you can interact with Mentality Project. That's kind of what I've been really excited about when I see the different arms and legs of what's your fraternity mentality, kind of those different aspects. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good.
I'm at
go
the
ahead.
end of my day, so I start getting a little, I get inconcise.
You're sounding good so far. I wanted to ask, because you kind of like touched on this right now in your response to a previous question, but a question that we had was, how do you think the project can impact our campus community climate, and what impact do you think it can have? And I think one thing that you really said was, creating programming specifically tailored for masculine identified folks, like this programming being obviously having men in the name and it being, promoted that way. But I'm just wondering what you think the impact of this project can have at Tulane. And if you want to provide any, tips, or not tips, but any like ideas that you have on the impact we could have, feel free to also share that as well.
I think when you're providing people with the kind of knowledge and skills that Mentality Project is trying to equip people with, it's kind of a limitless opportunity. I'll be honest, because the hope is that students don't just apply what they've learned while at Tulane. The hope is that they go into the world and they apply those kind of practices in healthy masculinity in their daily lives. So I think that if you're asking me how impactful it could be to rewrite narratives and norms around masculinity, I think it could change most of our daily experiences. Because we can see kind of toxic ideas of different identity categories and how those impact daily. We think about like the toxic characteristics of white supremacy and how those can impact systems. Mm-hmm. Same with toxic masculinity, like these can affect systems that impact our day and determine our daily lived lives. So if you're just asking me what can it do, I think that the idea is limitless. I think the challenge is always that, again, kind of something that I've talked about earlier, we've trained mass folks to not enter into these conversations. We've said, this has nothing to do with you. Don't talk about sexual violence, or this will be uncomfortable if you show up. So I think that the challenge is gaining the trust of the community to have these conversations. I think that it's challenging and it's daring for people with masculine identities to talk about toxic masculinity because of the kind of enforcement of that toxicity that we talk about with like the man box activity. It's dangerous to say, I don't know, should I be, doing this? Is this the right way to do things? And so I think that if we stay steadfast and continue to be responsive to what students are asking for, and they continue to engage in this programming and in these conversations, I really think that it can make a monumental effect on the daily lives of our students, but also the people that they interact with. Because again, healthy masculinity, any healthy identity category is, capable of understanding boundaries, empathetic of other people, capable of controlling oneself. And so if we can give that to people through any of their identities, we're winning. Like, we're doing really good as preventionists.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Kind of shifting a little bit to the work that you're doing with the departmental organization, SAPHE. How often are they speaking about like their work with masculine identified individuals? Are they seeing calls from masc identified individuals? And what do you think could be barriers of our masculine students?
Yes. Okay. So I have to be cautious about how you have not asked me to, but SAPHE has extra layers of confidentiality up and above what like HIPAA would come. So we do receive calls from all gender identities. Mm-hmm. That's about as much as I can say. Okay. I think, while still respecting the guidelines on that particular. SAPHE, I would say that like all sexual assault survivor support organizations and hotlines, we see a disproportionately low interaction from people that do not hold feminine identities. So, you would expect, if you have 50% of the campus holding a masked identity, or 45% holding a masked identity, you would expect 45% of your calls to be that. That across the nation is not what we see. We see overwhelmingly masculine identifying folks not using the resources for sexual assault survivors that we see in the numbers that we see from folks using them. So I think that kind of gets to the butt of the question without kind of giving any precise numbers. Now, what was the third element of that question?
Just what are the barriers that you...
What are the barriers? So I kind of mentioned this earlier, but there's a lot that goes into it. So I think that the biggest barrier is that often masculine identifying folks don't identify what has happened to them as sexual violence. Mm-hmm. They know it deeply upsets them. They know something feels wrong. They know that they were uncomfortable. They know that their body reacted in a way that upset them or bothered them or made them feel uncomfortable. So they can identify something wrong happened here. But again, not only do we not give the language, we actively train masculine identifying folks to not see themselves as victims of violence. And so a lot of times, masculine folks feel the effects of sexual violence, but can't actually identify what that was. And you have to be able to identify what something is to access support, if that makes sense. So I need to know what hurts to tell the doctor so that they can fix it. And a lot of times our mask identifying folks can't tell what hurts, and that holds them back from resources. So I think that that's one of the biggest barriers. And a lot of times, what the first entry into support that you see with mask folks is kind of a discussion of what happened. So what is common is to kind of hear something along the lines of, I don't know what, I don't know how to describe this. I don't think it was sexual assault, but I'm really upset. I can't sleep, I can't eat. And then they'll describe a situation that is, textbook definition of a sexual assault. But they've never been empowered to see themselves as experiencing that. And so it's okay if you know something deeply upsets you, or even upsets you a little bit, and you're not sure what it is, it's okay to reach out to SAPHE. That's a lot of what we talk about with people, is just people want to just explore something, and we're there to listen and to help kind of guide, give resources, and give, ways to explore more of what that means to you. And so it's okay if you're not sure if you're a survivor of what happened to you with sexual assault. You can call the SAPHE hotline and just talk to us about it, and we'll be there for you. And you can work out for yourself exactly what that meant to you. But that's probably the biggest barrier that we see with any kind of support service, is that, again, we disempower mask folks from, naming and acting on their survivorship.
Thank you so much for giving us an insight on what happens with SAPHEs and their advocacy experiences with masculine identified folks. Definitely want to, before we end the conversation, have you plug SAPHE's information as well for folks that are watching that may not have their contact information.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about what SAPHE is, and then I'll give you kind of all the information. And I'm going to be completely honest, I'm making sure the phone number's in front of me, because I am not a phone number person. I didn't know my husband's phone number for the first 12 years of our relationship.
Fair.
Okay, so SAPHE is a 24/7 resource for Tulane students throughout the fall and spring semester. So when school is out, SAPHE is out of session. When school is in session, SAPHE is available. They do a couple of different things. The first and most important thing is they run a 24/7 hotline. I'll give that phone number again, but it's 504-654-9543. I actually did remember it correctly, but who needs credit? So that's the phone number. It's available 24/7. SAPHEs go through 40 hours of initial training and then between 20 to 30 hours of annual training to be certified in advocacy and crisis response. They are available to provide resources. They are available to talk through experiences. They are there to support, to listen. Their tagline is no call too small. So seriously, don't hesitate. If you think you want to reach out to SAPHE, call us. We'll be there for you. Another thing we do is we provide survivor support for events. So if we're having an event that might be potentially triggering, we're going to make sure that there's some advocates in the room to provide support in the instance that you need it. And we also provide workshops. So SAPHE does a couple of workshops supporting survivors, understanding sexual violence 101, and the consent conversation, all focused on very specific areas of sexual violence prevention and response work. But we're available to do those workshops for any student organization, class, department that would like them. You can request them through the WELS website. But again, I just want to kind of plug a hotline. I know that hotlines, like, no one likes to be on the phone anymore and stuff like that, and it can be kind of intimidating, but really it can be a safe place to start. It's completely confidential. Nobody sees your face. You don't have to give any information about yourself whatsoever. And you can just talk to somebody who's a peer, somebody who's in the same community as you, somebody who has the same experience, similar experiences, not going to have the same experiences, but who has similar experiences and who really understands the resources and the systems of the university, so can answer questions. So please, 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 please call us if you just need someone to talk to, or you have a question, or you need to say something out loud to somebody else and you never repeat it to another person. So again, that phone number is 504-654-9543. Please give us a call.
Thank you so much. So we only have like a couple more questions, but the question that I want to ask is, how do you think, since you work really closely with students especially, how do you think a two-lane student could be a positive role model against unhealthy masculinity and against violence? And are there any, skills that you feel are important to work on to be a positive role model? I've heard a lot of like empathy, authenticity, vulnerability, but I'm just wondering if there's any others that you feel are very important.
You kind of just named, I think, the three.
Sorry.
We know that protective factors from being violent are things like a strong sense of identity, a strong bond to a community, empathy skills, and then things like impulse control, anger management. Those are what we know are protective factors from people harming other people. And again, that's talking about any kind of power-based violence. So there are skills and instincts within us that we should steward and protect and ask to thrive. I think the biggest thing is a sense of who you want to be. So it gets really easy to make the wrong decision when you're making decisions based on what other people kind of want you to do. And we know that society and our peers and and the culture that we live in isn't always the healthiest, right? And sometimes they ask us to reflect that unhealthiness back. And if we know who we are and we have a sense of who we want to be and the kind of relationships that we want to have, it's easier to fight against that. And on that same pendulum of equal value is empathy. So empathy is not, I'm so sorry, or that must be a bummer. Empathy is spending time in other people's situations in life in a state of reflection. So you are not going to be able to know what another person experiences, but you are capable of stopping and saying, if this happened to me, what might I be feeling in this moment? Like, am I feeling betrayed? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling elated? Would I be proud? Would I be disappointed? And just constantly going to a place where you are trying to empathize and understand the experiences of other people. Because when you are locked in and aware of and intentionally paying attention to how other people are experiencing their lives, it's harder to harm people. So when you're saying, how would I feel if a person did this harmful thing to me? What would that experience be like? Would I like that? Would I walk away okay from that? And we kind of reflect on that. It's much easier for us to fight the impulse to do it because we are acutely aware of the negative consequences we're going to have on someone else. And we know how we would experience those consequences, and we don't want to do that. So having a sense of who we want to be in the relationships we want, and then the empathy to be able to anticipate how our actions are going to affect other people, I think are like, those are the golden, that's kind of the golden snitch of the violence prevention work. Yeah. For racism, sexism, heterosexism, like jingoism, all of those isms, all of those violent isms, all are counteracted when we have a healthy sense of self and an ability to empathetically relate to people who are not ourselves. And so that's what I would say. People who hold masculine identities, but people who hold any identities, like, invest in yourself in those two areas, and you will have better relationships, and you will be better liked. I mean, it just comes down, and we kind of all want healthy, loving relationships with ourselves and others. That's something that unifies us, you know.
Absolutely.
Thank you for those tips.
Yeah, I think we're still learning these things as we grow too, like as adults.
Yeah.
Working on our skills.
Especially knowing yourself.
Yes.
And Chelsea and Anthony have both worked with me really closely and probably can attest to, I often will come back and say, you know, I've been really reflecting on this, and you know, I now see it this way. And a lot of that is just empathy. Like, you might not immediately approach a situation with empathy, but then you say, okay, I'm going to practice what I preach, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to spend some time reflecting, and I'm going to see this entirely different because of that. And, you know, act on that. Be okay with saying, like, I was wrong in that moment. I reflected on it. Let me fix this. And toxic masculinity and toxic ego, which any identity can have, tells us, don't do that. Don't do that. That will make you look silly. But do that. It will make you have a better relationship.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. As we wrap up today, one, we want to thank you for being a part of the conversation series. I know Chelsea and I have had the opportunity to work with you closely, and will continue to work with you closely on sexual violence prevention work and healthy masculinity work. But you agreed to be a part of our conversation. So we just want to know, what do you hope to see for the future of the Mentality Project?
I hope to see, I think that what the Mentality Project is doing is really excellent. And I want to see more students kind of running with it. So not just participating, but I want them to see this as like something that they, you know, that they can bring to the table, that they can bring to this world, and really kind of invest in healthy masculinity and the Masculinity Project. Like, we've seen so many students invest in other sexual violence prevention projects. So, like, huge shout out to Magnus, who I think is an amazing example of like putting your actions where your passions are and making a difference because of it. And I would just love to see like a league of mask identifying folks that are doing that kind of work. So like, here's my like call to action. Please, you know, there are places for you to get involved, and there is so much amazing energy. If this is work that you want to do, join the table, because I think that we can do it, but only when people like invest and sign in. And so that's what I would love to, I would just love to see exactly what's happening, more, kind of always being more greedy with more students and more discussions about healthy masculinity. And I think that that's where we're headed. You know, I see this grow semester after semester. And so I kind of hope that it continues growing and that more students are constantly finding value in it.
Perfect.
It's vague, but I'm greedy. I want everything full all the time. I want as many sessions as we can go. I think it's important work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again, Jennifer, for joining us. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, took lots of notes, and definitely going to take, I know me and Anthony are going to reflect on what was said today. But I just wanted to, yes, I just wanted to ask if you had any last words for any viewers. How can we contact you, reach out to you, or stay up to date with all of the amazing work that you are doing here at the Well?
Good questions. Last word would be, masculine folks, you have a place. You have a place here. You deserve to be here. We want you to be here, and we are trying to make spaces for you, because that's how much we value you in this work. And I also want to say to our masculine identifying survivors, I know you're out there, and I believe you, and I hope that you receive the resources and the support that you deserve, because you do deserve it. And if you need assistance, I'm one of many, but I'll throw my hat out there that can help. And I'm a confidential resource, which means I will not disclose to anyone else any information that you disclose to me. So that's kind of the last words that I wanted to give. So again, my name is Jennifer Hunt. My email is jhunt4@tulane.edu. Again, jhunt4@tulane.edu. I am always available. Please, 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 my cell phone is in the directory. It's in my signature line. My email is always, like, I am here, and I love when students reach out to me. So if you have an idea, if you have a question, if you wanted to talk more about something that I said, if I said something that made you crazy and you want to tell me how crazy it made you, please just reach out. Let's have a conversation. I'm here. And if you want to follow the work that Chelsea and I do outside of the Mentality Project, at the Well, I should say, at the Well, because there's lots of work happening outside of Chelsea and I. But at the Well, you can follow Tulane's Campus Health social medias, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at TU Campus Health. We post about our events all the time up there and host some of our events on there, including this one. So please follow. And next week, next Thursday, so a week from today, 7:30 to 8:30, we're going to be doing Sex After Dark, which is an anonymous Q&A event with Dynamo Toy sex educator Hope Codman, who is an incredible font of knowledge around everything sex and sexy. So please, 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 if you're interested, join in, especially our masculine folks. We don't get enough mass folks like coming in and asking questions about sex. We know you have them, ask them. Okay, so I think that that's everything I wanted to plug, but please do reach out. I have an open door, and I'm always really happy to hear from students. So please reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being our guest here. I know we'll all still remain close and working together on a variety of projects, and I'm looking forward to the spring semester with Body Respect Week and Sex Week, and then we'll have planned for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So viewers, stay tuned. And Jennifer, thank you again.
Thank you. I'll see y'all later.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.